The first thing Nia Harper noticed was the sound. Not laughter, something more intimate than that. A low, careless murmur, the kind that assumes privacy because it has never been challenged. It drifted through the half-open door of the penthouse like smoke, curling around her before her mind could catch up. She stood frozen in the hallway, rain still clinging to the hem of her coat, one hand wrapped around the strap of her work bag. Seattle glittered behind her through floor-to-ceiling glass, the city blurred by water and light. But inside the apartment, everything felt unnaturally sharp. The smell of sandalwood, Ethan's favorite candle, mixed with a perfume she recognized instantly. Clara's. Clean, expensive, too familiar. Then she saw them. Ethan Caldwell, her husband of 4 years, barefoot on the cream rug she had picked out because he said it felt grounding. Clara Wynne, her best friend, her confidant, the woman who had held her hand through panic attacks and told her she was safe, was straddling him like this was not betrayal, but routine. Like this was simply how the world worked. Time didn't slow. It fractured. Nia's bag slipped from her fingers. Her phone slid across the marble floor, stopping inches from Ethan's foot. He looked down first, annoyed by the interruption, and then up at her face. His expression moved quickly, surprise, calculation, irritation, but never, not even for a second, guilt. "Nia," he said, calm as a boardroom voice. "This isn't," but it was exactly what it was. Clara gasped theatrically and reached for a throw blanket, eyes wide, lips parted as if she were the one caught off guard. As if she hadn't sat at Nia's kitchen table 2 nights earlier, sipping wine and advising her to give Ethan space and trust the process. Something inside Nia went very still. If you're already pulled into this moment, if you feel that tightness in your chest, that urge to know what happens next, go ahead and like this story, leave a comment, and follow the channel. Not because it helps an algorithm, but because stories like this deserve witnesses. Now stay with me. Ethan stood, slow and unhurried, wrapping the blanket around his waist. He didn't rush to explain. He didn't reach for her. He looked at her the way he looked at underperforming metrics on a slide deck. "We'll talk about this," he said. "Not like this. Let's be adults." Adults! The word landed like an insult. Nia waited for the pain to crash over her. But what came first was clarity. The late nights that never quite added up. The investor dinners she was never invited to. The way Clara always seemed to know Ethan's schedule better than she did. The joint accounts she hadn't checked in months because he said finances stressed her out. "You're in my home," Nia said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Ethan tilted his head. "Our home," he corrected automatically. Clara stood then, draping the blanket around herself, stepping closer with a tentative hand extended, as if comfort were still her role to play. "Nia, please listen." "Don't," Nia said, finally looking at her. "Don't say my name like that." Silence spread through the room, thick and expectant. Ethan exhaled, a sound halfway between patience and contempt. "Look, this doesn't have to be dramatic. We'll handle it cleanly. My attorney will send over paperwork. You'll sign. We'll protect everyone's reputations." There it was. Not an apology, not regret. A plan. Nia glanced past them at the city she had moved to for him, the career she had bent and reshaped to fit around his ambitions, the friendships that had slowly narrowed until Clara was the only one left standing. Somewhere, distantly, she was aware that a neighbor's security camera across the hall blinked red, quietly recording the moment her life split in two. She picked up her phone from the floor. "Get dressed," she said. "Both of you." Ethan frowned. "You're overreacting." "No," Nia replied, meeting his eyes for the first time since she walked in. "I'm observing." She turned and walked back into the rain, barefoot now, leaving the penthouse door open behind her. She didn't slam it. She didn't cry. She let the city see her as she was, wet, shaking, and upright. At the end of the hallway, the elevator doors slid closed, and with them, the last illusion she had been living inside. By morning, everyone would have a version of this story. But this was the moment it truly began. When Nia Harper looked back, the cage had not been constructed overnight. There were no bars welded in a single violent act. No locks slammed shut with obvious force. Ethan Caldwell had built it the way he built everything else in his life. Elegantly, incrementally, with a smile that made resistance feel unnecessary. At the beginning, he called it love. They had met at a tech and art mixer in Capitol Hill, the kind of event where ambition passed for personality and everyone pretended not to check their phones. Ethan had been magnetic in the effortless way of men accustomed to rooms opening for them. He spoke about his startup with practiced humility, about failure as if it were a temporary inconvenience that had never truly touched him. When he turned his attention to Nia, it was total, undivided, overwhelming. "You're different," he told her on their second date, as rain streaked the windows of a quiet bar. "You're not chasing anything. You already are something." She believed him because she wanted to, because she had worked hard to become who she was. A talented product designer with a steady career, her own apartment, her own rhythms, and it felt good to be seen without having to explain herself. The first changes were framed as care. Why exhaust herself commuting across the city when she could move into his penthouse, closer to his office, safer, more convenient? Why keep stressing over freelance clients when his income was stable enough for both of them to breathe? Why manage separate finances when we're a team now? He never demanded, he suggested. He wrapped every suggestion in concern, every redirection in praise. When she hesitated, he laughed softly and kissed her forehead. "You've been on your own for so long," he said. "Let someone take care of you." And Nia, who had been strong for as long as she could remember, allowed herself the unfamiliar luxury of rest. Isolation came disguised as efficiency. Ethan disliked her friends, not openly, never rudely, but he found ways to make their presence inconvenient. Dinners ran late. Emergencies arose. Subtle comments were dropped afterward. "They don't really get you. They seem jealous. I just hate how drained you are after seeing them." Calls to Atlanta with her family became shorter, then less frequent. Ethan would sigh when she booked flights home. "I support you," he insisted, "but every time you leave it sets us back." Us. The word was a leash. Her work followed. At first he praised her talent endlessly, bragged about her to investors, framed her as proof that he valued strong women. Then the tone shifted. Her deadlines conflicted with his needs. Her projects distracted her from what really mattered. When she was promoted, he congratulated her and then asked, casually, whether the extra stress was worth it. "Your job doesn't love you," he said one night, sliding a glass of wine into her hand. "I do." She began turning down opportunities, just for now, just until things settled. The money moved next. Ethan was brilliant with numbers, or so he claimed. He offered to optimize their finances, to protect them from unnecessary taxes and inefficiencies. He set up joint accounts, encouraged her to close old ones. He handled the paperwork, the passwords, the planning. When she asked questions, he answered quickly, confidently, never unkindly. "Trust me," he said. "I do this for a living." And she did. Until the day she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd logged into her own account without asking. By the time Clara entered their lives, the cage was nearly complete. Clara arrived as reinforcement, not disruption. She admired Ethan openly, validated his frustrations, and mirrored his concerns back to Nia with a softer voice. When Nia confessed that she felt off balance, Clara squeezed her hand and said, "Men like Ethan need space. If you relax, everything will realign." So Nia tried harder to be easy, quieter, more grateful. She mistook the shrinking of her world for maturity. She mistook control for stability. She mistook the absence of conflict for peace. It wasn't until much later, standing in the rain outside the penthouse, her life suddenly weightless and unmoored, that Nia understood the truth. Ethan had never wanted a partner. He wanted a system, one that revolved around him, reflected him, and made his life smoother. And she had been absorbed into it so gradually that by the time she realized the door was closed, she no longer knew where the key had gone. The cage hadn't been built to imprison her. It had been built to make her forget she ever needed to leave. If you asked Clara Wynn when it started, she would tell you it started long before Ethan Caldwell's penthouse, long before the candlelight and the lie of soft music meant to make sin feel elegant. She would tell you it began in a cramped townhouse outside Spokane, where the carpet was always damp and the walls were thin enough to hear her mother crying behind a locked bedroom door. Her mother had loved men the way drowning people love driftwood, desperately, blindly, at any cost. And every time the driftwood rotted, they both sank. Clara learned early that love was not a rescue. Love was leverage. Love was risk. If you wanted to survive, you needed proximity to power, not promises. She carried that lesson into adulthood like a hidden blade. In Seattle, Clara built herself into a woman nobody could ignore. She curated her life the way she curated crises. Sharp suit, clean lipstick, language that made people feel safe while she guided them exactly where she wanted them to go. Crisis PR paid well, but it paid best when the stakes were high and the men were rich. Ethan Caldwell was rich. Ethan Caldwell was stakes. The first time she met him, she didn't think, I want him. She thought, he's the kind of man who never loses. And if you could stand close enough to a man like that, maybe the losses of your childhood couldn't reach you anymore. Then she met Nia. Nia Harper didn't perform power. She simply had it, quiet competence, a mind that could turn complexity into clarity, a warmth that didn't demand anything back. Clara had watched women like Nia from the outside her whole life. Women who didn't need to sharpen themselves into weapons to be respected. Women who could be soft and still be safe. Clara wanted to hate her. Instead, she loved her. It happened in small moments. The first time Nia invited her over for dinner and didn't make her feel like she was auditioning. The way Nia remembered things Clara mentioned once, her favorite tea, the names of her nieces, that her mom's birthday was hard. The way Nia looked at her like she was real, not a tool, not a stepping stone. When Clara's last relationship ended in the predictable way, apologies, broken objects, police lights, Nia came over with takeout and stayed on the couch until morning. No judgment, no lecture, just presence. Clara had not been held that gently since she was a child. So yes, Clara was Nia's friend. And yes, Clara betrayed her anyway. Because friendship was a luxury Clara didn't trust. Ethan hired Clara to manage a brand disaster, a former employee threatening to go public with allegations about workplace intimidation and investor pressure. Ethan had been calm in the meeting, as if the accusations were a minor inconvenience. But Clara saw what he hid from everyone else, the flicker of panic underneath. The desperation of a man who could not stand to be seen as anything other than in control. He watched Clara while she spoke. Not her face, her responses. Measuring, calculating. You're good, he said afterward, in the private tone men use when they believed compliments were currency. I like people who understand how the game is played. Clara should have heard the warning in that sentence. Instead, she felt something dangerously familiar. The pull of being chosen. At first, Ethan's attention was professional. Long meetings, late texts, just one more call, then personal. A question about her childhood, a compliment about her taste, an invitation that sounded casual but wasn't. Clara told herself it was harmless because she wasn't taking anything from Nia. She was simply existing in the orbit Ethan created. But Ethan didn't do orbit. Ethan did ownership. He began with what he always began with. Language designed to rewrite reality. She doesn't appreciate you, he murmured one night as Clara gathered her files. You carry so much of her emotional weight. It's not fair. Clara laughed it off, but the sentence stuck. It was a seed, and Ethan watered it with small, consistent observations. Nia was too sensitive. Nia was too busy. Nia didn't understand the pressure Ethan was under. Ethan needed someone grounded, someone who could handle the real world. Someone like Clara. Clara knew these tricks. She'd used them herself, in different forms, to guide narratives in the press. She recognized the structure of manipulation the way musicians recognize notes. And still, she leaned in. Because Ethan's attention felt like safety. It felt like stepping onto a lifeboat after years of treading water. It felt like winning. The first time it happened, truly happened, it wasn't romantic. It was transactional, though neither of them said that out loud. Ethan kissed her after a late strategy session, and Clara's body reacted before her conscience could. She heard her own heartbeat and told herself she'd stop, she'd end it, she'd confess. But Ethan pulled back just enough to look into her eyes and said, "I've never felt understood like this." The lie was perfect. Not because it was true, but because it was useful. After that, every boundary blurred. Ethan became needy in a way that felt flattering until it felt like demand. He texted constantly. He wanted her near. He wanted her loyal. And Clara, who thought she was choosing power, began to realize she was being drafted into another cage. Except this time, she wasn't the one inside. She was the one helping lock the door. With Nia, Clara stayed soft. She gave advice. She smoothed doubts. She said, "He loves you," because Nia needed to believe it. And because if Nia stopped believing it, the whole structure would collapse. Clara told herself she wasn't cruel. She wasn't like the women who laughed while they ruined you. She was complicated. She was scared. She was surviving. But survival, Clara was learning, could still be a sin. On the afternoon Nia walked in, rain on her coat, eyes wide with shock, Clara saw her own reflection in the glass. A woman clinging to a blanket, pretending modesty, performing innocence while standing in the wreckage she helped create. For one breath, she wanted to fall to her knees and beg. She wanted to confess everything, that Ethan had pursued her relentlessly, that he spoke of Nia like a project, that he was already planning the divorce before Nia knew she was being left. But then Ethan looked at Clara with that quiet warning in his eyes, and Clara remembered what men like Ethan did when you threatened their narrative. They destroyed you. So Clara did the thing she had done her whole life. She chose the option that kept her breathing. She stepped past Nia. She touched her shoulder like comfort was still allowed, and she whispered the cruelest truth she could find. Not because she believed it, but because she needed Nia to stop looking at her like she was human. "He was never really yours," Clara said. Then she walked out of the penthouse and into the hallway, heart pounding, hands shaking, already tasting the metallic edge of regret. Because in that moment, before the elevator doors closed, Clara realized something that terrified her more than guilt. She had wanted to be the exception, but she had simply become the next woman in Ethan Caldwell's system. And systems, she knew, always demanded a sacrifice. The paperwork arrived 48 hours later. Not by mail, not with a conversation. It appeared in Nia's inbox at 6:12 a.m., a sleek PDF titled Separation Agreement, Caldwell v. Harper. As if 4 years of marriage were already reduced to opposing sides. The sender was a law firm whose name carried weight in Seattle's tech circles. The kind of firm that didn't threaten, they predicted. Nia opened the document on the edge of her narrow bed, the city still dark outside her single window. She read slowly at first, then faster, then not at all, her eyes skimming for the thing that would explain how this was possible. It didn't. The terms were devastating in their calm precision. No spousal support, no claim to equity, no access to accounts managed exclusively by Mr. Caldwell. A strict non-disclosure clause that forbade her from discussing the marriage, the affair, or Ethan's business practices with anyone, journalists included. In exchange, she would receive a one-time payment barely large enough to cover 2 months of rent in Seattle. At the bottom, highlighted in pale yellow, was a sentence that made her breath hitch. Failure to comply may result in legal action for reputational damages. Reputational damages, as if her reputation were the thing at risk. Nia scrolled back up, heart pounding, and saw the trap for what it was. The agreement assumed facts that had never been discussed, let alone proven. It framed her as volatile, emotionally unstable, prone to impulsive reactions. It described Ethan as the aggrieved party, forced into secrecy to protect his company from personal distractions. Personal distractions. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. This doesn't have to get ugly. Just sign and we can both move on. Move on to what? She wondered. To the life he had already started building without her? She closed the document and stared at the wall, at the faint crack running from the ceiling down toward the outlet. For the first time since the penthouse door closed behind her, fear arrived fully formed. Not heartbreak, not humiliation, fear. She tried to log into their joint checking account. Password changed. Her savings account froze. Her credit card declined. Nia sat very still, a cold understanding settling into her bones. This wasn't chaos. This was choreography. Ethan hadn't reacted to being caught because he hadn't been surprised. The affair wasn't an accident. It was an exit strategy. The money had been moved long before she needed it. The lawyer had been briefed. The narrative prepared. She called the bank. After 40 minutes on hold, a polite voice informed her that recent changes had been authorized by her husband, whose name appeared as primary account holder. She called the credit bureau next, her fingers numb as she verified her identity. Her score had dropped nearly 200 points. Accounts she didn't recognize stared back at her from the screen. Lines of credit, a business loan she had co-signed electronically, a personal guarantee tied to Ethan's startup, her name woven into obligations she had never understood. She laughed then, a sharp, broken sound that startled her. Not because it was funny, because it was precise. This was how the cage closed. Not with violence, but with paperwork. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Nia Harper, a woman's voice asked, crisp and unyielding. This is Denise Holloway, counsel for Mr. Caldwell. I trust you've received the agreement. Yes, Nia said. Good. My client would like this resolved quickly. Any attempt to contest the terms will only increase costs on both sides. You mean for me? Nia replied quietly. A pause, then. You're understandably emotional right now, but emotions don't change the facts. What facts? Nia asked. That I was financially isolated? That he moved money without my consent? That he... I would advise you, Denise interrupted smoothly, to be careful with accusations. Witnesses have already described your behavior as erratic the night you discovered the relationship. Witnesses, the neighbor's door, the elevator camera, the ring footage already circulating in the building's group chat. A woman standing barefoot in the hall while her husband's affair spilled into public view. You caused a scene, Denise continued. That doesn't play well in court. The call ended with a warning, disguised as concern. Nia set the phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes, willing the room to stop spinning. She wanted to call her mother. She wanted to hear Atlanta in her ear, the steadiness of a voice that knew her before she learned to be impressive. But something held her back. A stubborn, aching refusal to collapse into rescue. Not yet. By nightfall, Nia understood the truth with brutal clarity. The divorce wasn't about separation. It was about erasure. Ethan intended to leave her without money, without credibility, without language. He intended to make her silence look voluntary. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the building, the pipes, the distant traffic, the lives continuing above and below her, and felt something unfamiliar rise beneath the fear. Not hope, resolve. If this was a trap, then traps had mechanics. And mechanics, once understood, could be dismantled. Ethan had underestimated one thing. He thought breaking her would be enough. He had forgotten that Nia Harper built systems for a living, and that systems, no matter how carefully designed, always had a flaw. Humiliation, Nia learned, was not a single moment. It was a season. It arrived quietly at first, the way fog rolled in from Elliott Bay. Thin, deniable, easy to pretend wasn't really there. A pause in conversation when she entered a room, a smile that arrived half a second too late, invitations that stopped coming without explanation. Seattle liked to think of itself as progressive, discreet, above gossip. In reality, it trafficked in silence. And silence, when curated by the right people, was more effective than any headline. Ethan and Clara did not rush their story. They released it the way professionals release bad news. Slowly, strategically, with language polished until it sounded reasonable. Amicable separation. Different life trajectories. Mutual respect. Anyone who asked questions was met with a tired smile and a suggestion that it was all very private. Nia, on the other hand, had no version yet. She felt it the first time she walked into a coffee shop near Pioneer Square and noticed a woman from the startup accelerator she'd once mentored at glance up, hesitate, and then look away. The second time was at a networking mixer she attended out of necessity, not hope. Conversations shifted when she joined them, as if she carried an infection nobody wanted to catch. People didn't ask what happened. They asked how she was holding up, the phrase loaded with implication. They asked if she was taking time off. They asked if she'd thought about going home for a while. Home. As if Seattle had never been hers. The narrative crystallized one damp Thursday evening at a waterfront fundraiser for a climate tech nonprofit, an event she couldn't avoid because a former colleague had insisted. Nia stood near the edge of the room, nursing a drink she hadn't asked for, when the energy shifted. Heads turned. Smiles widened. Ethan had arrived. He looked composed, rested, exactly the way men looked when they believed chaos belonged to someone else. Clara was on his arm, elegant and subdued, her hair pulled back in a style that suggested humility without sacrificing beauty. Together, they made sense. That was the most devastating part. Nia watched from across the room as people greeted them warmly, some with relief, others with curiosity thinly disguised as concern. She could almost hear the subtext. So this is how it turned out. Good for him. She considered leaving. She stayed. Ethan spotted her a moment later. His eyes flickered with something like surprise, then settled into practiced warmth. He excused himself and walked toward her, the crowd parting easily in his wake. Nia, he said, as if they were former colleagues who had drifted apart. I'm glad you came. I was invited, she replied. He smiled, undeterred. Of course, you look, well, it was the way he said it, gentle, evaluative, public, that made her jaw tighten. Not concern, assessment. Clara hovered a step behind him, offering a sympathetic nod, the kind reserved for people you plan to talk about later. Hi, Nia, she said softly. It's been a lot. Yes, Nia agreed. It has. Ethan glanced around, lowering his voice just enough to appear considerate. I hope there are no hard feelings. We're all trying to move forward. Forward, past her. Someone nearby laughed, and Nia became acutely aware of how many people were watching without appearing to watch. This was the moment the story would be confirmed or corrected. The woman scorned or the woman unbothered. The stereotype or the anomaly. Clara tilted her head, eyes shining with something that might have been pity. If you ever need a reference, she offered, I still have great connections. Consulting, entry-level roles, that sort of thing. Entry-level. The word hung between them like a bruise. Nia felt the familiar surge, the heat behind the eyes, the pressure in the chest, the urge to defend herself, to list her accomplishments, to scream the truth into a room that had already decided it didn't want to hear it. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't sweet. It was controlled. That won't be necessary, Nia said. But thank you. She stepped past them, her shoulder brushing Ethan's sleeve, and walked toward the balcony overlooking the dark water. The city lights fractured on the surface below, beautiful and indifferent. Behind her, the room resumed its hum. The moment passed. The narrative remained intact. That night, alone in her small apartment, Nia sat on the floor with her back against the wall and let the tears come. Not loud, not dramatic, but relentless. She cried for the version of herself that had believed dignity would protect her. She cried for the friends who had vanished into neutrality. She cried for the way humiliation seeped into the body, making you doubt even your right to stand in a room. But beneath the grief, something else took shape. A question. What if she stopped trying to survive the season? What if she planned for the climate that came after? Outside, rain streaked the window in silver lines. Inside, Nia wiped her face, reached for her laptop, and began to write. Not an explanation, not a defense, but the first quiet outline of a future that did not require permission. Public humiliation, she understood now, was meant to shrink her. She decided, very deliberately, not to cooperate. The plane ticket sat open on Nia's laptop for 3 days. Atlanta to Seattle. One way. Refundable, but only barely. The blue button pulsed softly in the corner of the screen. Confirm purchase, as if it knew how much power it held. Atlanta meant her mother's cooking and her auntie's unsolicited advice. It meant familiar streets and voices that pronounced her name the way it was meant to be pronounced. It meant safety. It meant being seen without explanation. Seattle, by contrast, had become a series of closed doors and lowered voices. It was the city where she had loved and been humiliated, where her marriage had ended not with grief, but with paperwork and quiet cruelty. Every time she walked past glass buildings bearing startup logos, she felt like she was trespassing in a life she used to belong to. Leaving would be logical. Everyone said so. Her mother's voice echoed in her head from their last call. Baby, there is no shame in coming home. You don't owe that city anything. That was the problem. Nia feared that if she left now, she would carry Seattle with her forever. Not as a chapter, but as a verdict. The place where she had misjudged a man, the place where she had been reduced to a cautionary tale people whispered about over cocktails. The place where she had lost. She pressed her palms against her thighs, grounding herself in the present. The apartment around her was painfully small. A narrow bed, a folding table that doubled as desk and dining surface. One window that looked directly into the brick wall of the next building. Everything about it screamed temporary, which somehow made the choice heavier. She wasn't afraid of starting over. She was afraid of confirming the story Ethan had written for her, that she couldn't hack it, that she needed rescuing, that without him, she would retreat. The night before she was supposed to book the flight, Nia walked until her feet ached. She passed the waterfront, the tech offices glowing late into the evening, the bars where laughter spilled out onto wet sidewalks. Couples moved easily together, hands brushing, bodies angled in unconscious intimacy. She wondered how many of those women were quietly adjusting themselves to fit a man's life, mistaking compromise for love. At a bus stop near Belltown, she sat down and finally let herself think the thought she had been avoiding. What if leaving was failure? Not moral failure, not personal weakness, but failure of nerve, failure of endurance, failure to see something through to its end. She hated that the thought mattered. Nia had always been practical. She believed in data, in patterns, in cutting losses when the numbers didn't justify the risk. Everything about her situation pointed toward exit. No money, no allies, a damaged reputation, a legal noose tightening quietly around her future. And yet, there was something unresolved here, something unfinished. The humiliation still burned, yes, but beneath it lived anger. And beneath the anger lived something more dangerous, clarity. She saw Ethan now with brutal sharpness. She saw the system he had built and how easily it could be replicated in other women's lives. She saw the gap between what people believed about financial independence and how fragile it truly was when love turned predatory. If she left now, she would heal. If she stayed, she might change something. The thought scared her more than the idea of going home. Back in her apartment, Nia closed the flight tab without booking it. She opened a blank document instead. The cursor blinked at her, expectant. She wrote the words economic control at the top of the page. Then coercion, then design failures. She mapped moments from her marriage not as memories, but as mechanisms, where choice had narrowed, where information had been withheld, where trust had been exploited. By dawn, the page was crowded with notes, arrows, half-formed ideas. Her fear hadn't vanished, but it had been given a direction. She would leave Seattle eventually. She wasn't pretending otherwise. Pride alone was not a strategy. But she would not leave like this, silent, erased, carrying someone else's narrative like a scar. She needed leverage, proof, something tangible that could not be dismissed as emotion or bitterness. Nia closed her laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the city was waking up, indifferent as ever. For the first time since the divorce papers arrived, she felt something close to calm. This was not her exit. It was a pause. And pauses, she knew, were where the next move was decided. The room was barely wide enough for Nia to stretch her arms without touching both walls. She had found it after 3 days of searching, too tired to be picky, too stubborn to go back. A sublet above a closed nail salon in the Central District, month to month, cash preferred. The ceiling slanted low near the window, and the radiator hissed like it resented being asked to work. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with 2 strangers she never quite saw, only heard in the night. It was the smallest space she had lived in since college. It was also the first place that was hers. Nia set her suitcase down and stood still, listening. No penthouse hum, no city panorama, no carefully curated silence, just the faint buzz of traffic and the rhythmic drip of a leaky pipe somewhere behind the wall. She exhaled. The first night, she slept on the floor with her coat folded under her head. The second night, she dragged the narrow bed closer to the window and woke to gray light pressing in, unromantic and honest. By the third, the room had begun to feel less like exile and more like containment, small enough to force focus, bare enough to strip distraction. That was when the plan stopped being abstract. Nia taped a single sheet of paper to the wall above the desk she had salvaged from the curb. On it, she wrote one sentence in thick black marker. What actually happened to me? Not emotionally, mechanically. She opened her laptop and began where she always did, with structure. She rebuilt her marriage as a system. Inputs, outputs, permissions, dependencies. She mapped the moments where autonomy narrowed, where choices were rerouted for efficiency, where trust replaced verification. Every credit card she no longer controlled. Every password changed for security. Every document she signed while distracted, reassured, in love. What emerged wasn't a tragedy, it was a pattern. The realization made her stomach drop. This wasn't rare. This wasn't personal failure. This was a design flaw in how intimacy and money were allowed to intertwine without safeguards. The next step came from an unlikely place. On a flyer taped crookedly to the laundry room door, she noticed a meeting time and a handwritten note. Survivors of Financial Abuse Support Circle, Thursdays, 7 p.m. No branding, no website, just an address in a church basement 6 blocks away. She almost didn't go, but curiosity, once sparked, is hard to smother. The circle was small. 7 women, folding chairs, paper cups of lukewarm tea, stories that landed heavy and familiar. Different men, different cities, same playbook. One woman had lost her house, another her immigration status, another her business. When Naya described the joint accounts, the NDA, the sudden collapse of her credit, heads nodded around the circle, not with pity, but recognition. "Oh," one woman said quietly, "he was setting you up." The words landed cleanly, without drama. On the walk home, Nia felt something shift. Not relief, not rage, permission. Back in the tiny room, she didn't cry, she worked. She sketched interfaces on scrap paper. Systems that defaulted to transparency, accounts that couldn't be altered without dual confirmation, alerts that flagged patterns of control before they became cages. Education built into design, not condescension, but clarity. This wouldn't be an app for victims. It would be a tool for autonomy. Days blurred. Nia took contract work during daylight hours, fixing onboarding flows, improving accessibility, solving other people's problems for money she counted carefully. At night, she built. She researched compliance requirements, consumer finance law, trauma-informed design. She filled notebooks with diagrams and questions and blunt truths. The room transformed. Sticky notes crept across the walls. Arrows connected ideas in looping paths. Her bed became a filing surface. The radiator kept hissing. The pipe kept dripping. Time kept moving. Ethan faded. Not emotionally, not yet, but structurally. He stopped being the center of the story. He became data, a case study, a cautionary example that no longer had the power to dictate her next step. One night, as rain rattled the window and her eyes burned from staring at code, Nia leaned back in her chair and laughed softly. Not because anything was funny, because for the first time since the penthouse door, she felt aligned. She was poor. She was alone. She was legally constrained and socially suspect. And she was thinking clearly. The tiny room did what the penthouse never had. It gave her silence without control, focus without fear, space, however limited, to imagine a future that did not depend on being believed, forgiven, or invited back into rooms she had outgrown. Nia capped the marker and underlined the sentence on the wall. What actually happened to me? The answer, she was beginning to understand, was not the end of her story. It was the blueprint for something much larger. Nia's first version was built on borrowed time and borrowed grace. She called it Anchor, a name meant to suggest stability without weight. It wasn't an app yet, not really. It was a clickable prototype stitched together with open-source tools, spreadsheets, and a prayer she didn't believe in. The idea was simple and ambitious in equal measure. Give women a way to see their money clearly, independently, before control became collapse. She partnered with a small nonprofit that worked with women leaving coercive relationships. They were underfunded, overworked, and grateful for anything that might help. Nia trained their staff on the prototype in a cramped office that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and hope. She watched as the women clicked through the screens, eyes narrowing, shoulders relaxing, questions forming. For a brief, dangerous moment, Nia believed. The first week went better than she expected. Dozens of signups, long emails from users thanking her for building something that didn't talk down to them. One woman wrote, "I didn't realize how much I'd stopped checking my own accounts until this made me look." Nia printed that sentence and taped it to the wall. Then the cracks appeared. Users got confused in the onboarding flow. Some abandoned the process halfway through. Others misunderstood what the tool could and couldn't do, assuming it would magically fix years of financial damage. The nonprofit's caseworkers flagged concerns, questions about data security, about liability, about what would happen if an abusive partner discovered the alerts. Nia worked through the nights, adjusting copy, simplifying screens, patching gaps as fast as they surfaced. But the deeper problem wasn't design, it was infrastructure. 2 weeks in, she received an email from a volunteer attorney who'd taken a look at Anchor's framework. The subject line was careful. The body was not. "You are dangerously close to violating consumer finance regulations. You need compliance. Yesterday." Nia stared at the screen, pulse thudding in her ears. Compliance meant money, lawyers, time, everything she didn't have. She tried to pivot, remove certain features, add disclaimers, slow the rollout, but the damage was already done. The nonprofit's board got nervous. Their funding depended on appearing risk-free. They asked her to pause the pilot until further notice. The pause felt like a door closing. The final blow came quietly. One of the women who had been most enthusiastic stopped responding. When Nia finally reached her caseworker, the explanation arrived carefully, with apologies layered thick enough to smother the truth. Her partner had found the alerts. He hadn't hit her. He hadn't shouted. He had simply smiled and changed every password that night. Nia closed her laptop and sat on the floor of the tiny room, her back against the wall, hands trembling. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This wasn't her pain repurposed into purpose. This was someone else's safety. She had failed. The realization was physical. A heaviness behind the eyes, a hollow ache in the chest. She replayed every decision, every shortcut taken because she was tired, because she was alone, because she had wanted it to work so badly she'd believed urgency could substitute for readiness. For the first time since the divorce, the thought returned in full force. You should have left. She imagined Atlanta again, the familiar streets, the ease of being held without explanation. She imagined packing up the notes, the sketches, the stubborn dream, and labeling them what they might actually be. A mistake. That night, she tore the printed sentence off the wall and folded it into her pocket. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She lay on the bed and stared at the slanted ceiling until the city outside went quiet. Failure, she realized, wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It arrived with administrative language and careful concern. It arrived wearing the mask of responsibility. The next morning, she sent the email herself. I'm shutting Anchor down. Effective immediately. I'm sorry. Her finger hovered over send for a long moment before she clicked. The room felt smaller afterward. The walls closer. The radiator louder. Nia packed the prototype files into a folder labeled Version 0 and moved it to an external drive she could barely afford. She told herself she was being rational, ethical, that stopping was the right thing to do, but the truth sat heavy in her chest. She had been so careful not to be reckless with other people's lives that she hadn't been brave enough to risk her own dream properly. As the day wore on, emails trickled in. Kind ones, disappointed ones. One from the woman whose sentence still lay folded in Nia's pocket. Even if it didn't work, the message read, it helped me see the truth sooner. Thank you. Nia closed her eyes. Failure, she understood then, wasn't proof she was wrong. It was proof she had touched something real. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the doubt, a quieter, more dangerous thought began to form. What if the problem wasn't the idea, but the scale? What if she hadn't failed because she reached too far, but because she hadn't gone far enough? The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. Subject line unadorned, almost severe. I heard about Anchor. I want to see what you were trying to build. No emojis, no platitudes, just a name at the bottom Nia recognized instantly. Dr. Miriam Sato. Nia read it 3 times, pulse quickening with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Miriam Sato was not a cheerleader. She was a former CFO who had survived 3 market crashes, built 2 companies that still existed, and funded women founders with a reputation for being brutally honest. People said she could dismantle a pitch in 10 minutes and leave you grateful for the wreckage. Nia replied with a single sentence and an attachment. Version 0. I shut it down. They met 2 days later in a quiet cafe near Lake Union, the kind with hard chairs and excellent coffee, chosen not for comfort but for clarity. Miriam arrived on time, silver hair pulled back, posture straight, eyes sharp without being unkind. She didn't order anything at first. She opened her laptop and began reading. For 40 minutes, she said nothing. Nia sat across from her, hands folded, resisting the urge to explain, justify, apologize. She had done enough of that in her marriage. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Miriam scrolled, paused, highlighted sections, frowned. Once, she shook her head, not in disapproval, but in recognition. Finally, she closed the laptop. Do you know why this failed? Miriam asked. Nia swallowed. Because I wasn't ready. Because I didn't have the resources. Because No, Miriam said calmly. Because you were still thinking like someone trying not to be hurt. The words landed cleanly, without cruelty. You built a tool that asked for permission, Miriam continued. You assumed fragility. You designed for escape, not power. That's why it broke. Nia felt heat rise in her chest. I was trying to be ethical. You were trying to be small, Miriam corrected. There's a difference. Nia stiffened. Old reflexes flared. The instinct to defend, to explain context, to soften the blow. Miriam raised a hand. Don't misunderstand me, she said. Your instincts are excellent. Your analysis is sharp. You understand the problem better than most regulators. but you're still negotiating with the part of yourself that thinks survival is enough. Miriam leaned forward. It's not. She clicked the laptop open again, turning the screen toward Nia. This isn't an app problem. This is a systems problem. Financial coercion doesn't happen because women are careless. It happens because our infrastructure allows intimacy to override safeguards. You're trying to patch holes in a sinking ship. Nia's throat tightened. So what am I supposed to do? Stop building lifeboats, Miriam said. Build a new ship. The metaphor hit harder than Nia expected. Miriam continued, relentless and precise. You don't need a pilot, you need a platform. You don't need disclaimers, you need regulatory armor. And you don't need to ask nonprofits for permission. You need to partner with institutions that can't afford to ignore you. That takes money, Nia said quietly. Yes, Miriam replied, and courage. She closed the laptop again. How much runway do you have? Barely any. Good, Miriam said. You won't waste time. Nia stared at her. You're not telling me to quit. No, Miriam said. I'm telling you to grow up. The words should have stung. Instead, they steadied her. Miriam reached into her bag and slid a card across the table. I'll fund you, seed capital, enough to do this correctly, compliance, security, talent. But I don't invest in charity projects disguised as startups. Nia's breath caught. What's the catch? Miriam met her gaze without blinking. You stop centering your ex-husband. You stop building from injury. And you stop pretending you want a modest outcome. Nia hesitated. And if I can't, then you shouldn't take my money, Miriam said simply. Because power will only magnify what you bring into it. Silence settled between them, different from before. Not evaluative, expectant. Nia thought of the tiny room, the folded note in her pocket, the woman whose partner had smiled and changed the passwords. She thought of Ethan, not with rage now, but with clarity. I don't want revenge, Nia said slowly. Good, Miriam replied. Revenge is reactive. I want autonomy, Nia continued. Mine and theirs. Miriam smiled then, not warmly, but with satisfaction. That, she said, is scalable. They shook hands across the table. Miriam finally ordered her coffee. As Nia stepped back out into the gray Seattle afternoon, something fundamental had shifted. Not her circumstances, not her fear, her posture. For the first time, she wasn't trying to prove she had been wronged. She was preparing to be taken seriously. And that, she sensed, would change everything. Power noticed Nia the moment she stopped asking for permission. The seed funding cleared. The contracts with Compliance Council were signed. A small, serious team began to assemble. Engineers who asked hard questions. A security lead who thought in threat models instead of features. A product manager who refused to ship anything that could endanger a user. The work moved from the floor of her tiny room to a borrowed office with bad lighting and excellent whiteboard. And almost immediately, the pressure arrived. It came disguised as concern. An investor she barely knew asked, casually, whether she was emotionally ready to lead a company rooted in trauma. A former colleague warned her that certain people were saying she was difficult to work with. An email from a law firm, different from Ethan's, but familiar in tone, suggested that her ideas might be derivative of proprietary systems already in development. Nia read everything. She responded to nothing. Miriam had been clear. Attention was not the danger. Reaction was. The company, now renamed Ledgerly, grew in quiet defiance of the noise. They built safeguards that anticipated misuse, dual authentication flows that couldn't be overridden by charm, educational prompts embedded where control usually hid, systems designed to surface power imbalances without triggering retaliation. Nia worked 18-hour days and slept badly. She lived on cold noodles and bitter coffee. Some nights she dreamed in flowcharts. Other nights she dreamed of the penthouse door opening again, over and over, until she woke with her jaw clenched and her hands numb. That was when Ethan made his first move. It wasn't direct. He was smarter than that. A mutual contact reached out to Miriam under the guise of friendly curiosity, asking whether she was aware of Nia Harper's history. The phrasing was careful, concerned, loaded. Soon after, a journalist emailed Nia requesting comment on allegations related to her divorce. Nothing specific, just enough to signal what was coming. Ethan was reminding her that he still existed. Nia felt the old instinct flare, the urge to defend herself, to preempt the narrative, to explain. Miriam shut it down in one sentence. Do not litigate your life in public. Instead, they prepared. Legal counsel documented timelines. Security teams stress-tested systems for bad actors. Communications drafted a single, unadorned statement about the company's mission. No mention of Ethan, no reference to betrayal, no invitation to spectacle. The hunt intensified anyway. An anonymous tip alleged that Ledgerly's alerts could endanger families. A potential partner froze talks without explanation. An investor asked whether association with Nia might be politically sensitive. The coded language was unmistakable. You are too loud. You are too angry. You are not safe to back. Nia absorbed it all with a stillness that surprised even her. She remembered the support circle, the nods of recognition. She remembered that systems failed most often when they relied on silence to function. So she adjusted, not by shrinking, but by strengthening. They brought on an ethics board. They invited regulators into early conversations. They published their security standards openly, daring critics to find gaps. Each move made the company harder to dismiss without exposing bad faith. Late one night, as rain hammered the windows, Nia stood alone in the office, staring at a diagram that traced how control moved invisibly through money. She realized then that Ethan had taught her more than he ever intended. He had shown her exactly how power behaved when it felt threatened. The email arrived the next morning. From Ethan. No subject line, no greet. I hear you're building something risky. You should be careful. People don't forget scenes. Nia stared at the words, her pulse steady, almost bored. She forwarded the message to counsel, archived it, and returned to her work. Ledgerly shipped its closed beta that afternoon. The first institutional partner signed the following week. By the end of the month, the whispers had shifted. Not vanished, never vanished, but changed shape. Where there had been doubt, there was now curiosity. Where there had been warnings, there were requests for meetings. Nia understood the pattern now. Predators hunted what they believed could still be isolated. She was no longer alone. As she locked the office that night, exhaustion heavy in her bones, Nia felt the strange clarity of being pursued and unafraid. They could watch. They could whisper. They could circle. She was building anyway. And every system she strengthened made it clearer. This was no longer about survival. It was about inevitability. Clara Wynne didn't call. She didn't text either. No soft introduction, no, "Hey, stranger," no attempt to slide back into Nia's life as if betrayal were a misunderstanding that time could polish into something forgivable. Instead, she appeared the way guilt sometimes appeared, uninvited, unprotected, and shaking beneath a coat that was too thin for Seattle rain. Nia saw her through the office glass first, standing in the lobby with her arms wrapped around herself. Clara looked smaller than she used to, as if the city had finally stopped flattering her. Her hair was pulled back hastily, no perfect lipstick, no camera-ready composure. A woman stripped of performance. Nia didn't move right away. She watched Clara shift her weight from foot to foot, glance at the security desk, then toward the elevator as if debating escape. Nia felt something almost like curiosity rise in her chest, edged with a colder, more durable emotion. Not hatred, distance. When Nia finally stepped into the lobby, Clara's head snapped up. Their eyes met and Clara flinched like she'd been struck. "Nia," Clara said, voice rough, "I know I don't deserve." "You're right," Nia replied. The words landed without cruelty. They were simply true. Clara swallowed, blinking fast. "Please, 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." The security guard's gaze flicked between them. Nia hesitated, not because she feared Clara, but because she understood what moments like this could become. Scenes, narratives, emotional traps disguised as closure. Still, she gestured toward a side corridor near the vending machines, where the hum of fluorescent lights made everything look faintly unreal. They stood facing each other under a poster about workplace safety, as if the universe enjoyed irony. Clara's hands trembled as she dug into her bag. "I'm not here to ask forgiveness," she said quickly. I'm not that delusional." Nia's silence was permission enough. Clara inhaled shakily. "Ethan he's not who people think he is. I mean, you know that, but it's worse now. He's spiraling, and he's trying to take you down with him." Nia's gaze sharpened. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes glistened. "Because I helped him, and I can't pretend I didn't." There it was. Not an excuse, not a rewrite, an admission. Clara pulled out a slim flash drive and held it out as if it weighed too much. "This has emails, messages, drafts of talking points he wrote for me, things he wanted planted, investors he asked me to influence." She swallowed hard. "It also has evidence of how he moved money, how he set you up." Nia stared at the flash drive, something cold and electric moving through her veins. Proof, leverage, the thing Ethan believed she'd never hold. "You kept this," Nia said. Clara's laugh broke, ugly and thin. "At first I kept it because I thought I might need it. Insurance." Her voice dropped. "Because even while I was doing what he wanted, I knew he'd do to me what he did to you." "Did he?" Clara's eyes lowered. "Not exactly. Not yet. But I'm starting to recognize the pattern. He's controlling. He wants constant access, constant loyalty. If I don't respond fast enough, he accuses me of abandoning him. If I disagree, he calls me ungrateful." She pressed her palm against her forehead like she could physically hold herself together. "He doesn't love. He consumes." Nia felt a flicker of something. Recognition, maybe. But it didn't soften her. It clarified her. Clara looked up, desperate now. "I told myself I was surviving, that I was choosing power, but I wasn't. I was choosing him. And I knew what that meant. I watched my mother do that." Her voice cracked. "And I still did it." Nia studied her carefully. Clara's confession wasn't polished. It wasn't brave in a cinematic way. It was raw and trembling and late. But it was real. "What do you want?" Nia asked. Clara flinched. "I want you to know I'm sorry." Silence. "I know it doesn't fix anything," Clara rushed on. "I know you don't owe me a single kind word. I'm not asking you to let me back in your life. I'm not asking to be your friend again." Her throat bobbed. "I'm asking you to take this and use it, because he shouldn't keep getting away with it." Mia reached out slowly and took the flash drive. Clara exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. "Thank you," she whispered, relief and shame tangling together. Nia's expression didn't change. "This isn't forgiveness," she said. "This is evidence." Clara nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I know." Nia waited. "Is that all?" Clara's shoulders sagged. "There's one more thing." Her voice grew quieter, almost childlike. "He never planned to keep me. He told me," she swallowed, "he told me you were a phase, a mistake he'd corrected. And then after you left, he started talking about you like you were property he'd misplaced." Nia's jaw tightened, not with pain, but with disgust. "He thinks in ownership," she said softly. Clara nodded. "He's angry that you're building something. He's angry that people are listening. He thinks you're humiliating him." Nia almost smiled at that. Almost. Clara took a step back, as if making space for the boundary she understood she could not cross. "I'll disappear after this," she said. "I won't contact you again. Her voice broke. "I just needed to do one thing that wasn't for him." Nia held her gaze. "Do it again," she said. "Not for me, for you." Clara blinked, startled, then nodded once, sharply, as if accepting an order she'd always needed. She turned to leave, then hesitated, shoulders tense. Naya? Yes. I meant what I said that day, Clara whispered, when I told you he was never really yours. Her face twisted with self-loathing. I said it to hurt you, but it was also true in a way I didn't understand yet. She swallowed. He wasn't yours because he isn't anyone's. He belongs to his appetite. Nia's voice was quiet, final. And I belong to myself. Clara's eyes filled again. She nodded and walked out into the rain, head bowed, disappearing through the glass doors like a ghost leaving a crime scene. Nia stood alone in the corridor, the flash drive cold in her palm. For the first time in months, she felt the ground shift under Ethan's feet. Not because someone had come to save her, because someone who had once helped lock the cage had finally handed her a key. The meeting that changed everything began with a warning. A conference room high above downtown Seattle. Glass walls, muted carpet, the faint smell of lemon cleaner. Corporate neutrality so complete it felt designed to erase emotion. Across the table sat 3 executives from Cascadia Credit Union Network, 2 attorneys, and a woman from a national domestic violence nonprofit whose eyes held the exhausted steadiness of someone who had seen too much and still kept showing up. Nia had imagined this moment for months, the partnership that would take leisurely from promising to unavoidable. She had pictured applause, relief, the clean satisfaction of doors opening. Instead, the lead attorney slid a document across the table and said, "If we do this and it goes wrong, someone could get hurt." The sentence landed like a weight. Nia didn't flinch. She glanced down at the document, a security and compliance checklist so thick it looked like punishment. Penetration testing, data minimization protocols, incident response timelines, regulatory interpretations, risk disclosures written in legal language sharp enough to cut. The nonprofit representative, Lena Brooks, studied Nia without blinking. "I'm not here for a good story," Lena said quietly. "I'm here for outcomes. Women don't need another app that makes promises and disappears when the headlines fade." Nia's throat tightened. She thought of Anchor, the woman whose partner found the alerts and smiled while he changed every password. The guilt was still there, a scar she refused to cover with bravado. "You're right," Nia said. "They don't need promises. They need infrastructure." Miriam watched from the corner of the room, expression unreadable. She didn't rescue. She never rescued. She let Nia stand in the heat of scrutiny and either become stronger or collapse. The executives asked hard questions. Not cruel ones, worse than that, clinical ones. What happens if an abusive partner has access to the phone? What happens if they intercept alerts? What happens if a user is coerced into sharing credentials? How do you verify identity without exposing someone to retaliation? What are your legal obligations if you suspect imminent harm? Each question was a door. Each answer could be a lock. Nia didn't pitch. She didn't perform. She explained. She walked them through the architecture, the stealth modes, the safe wording, the silent flags that didn't flash like alarms, the permission layers, the default to safety design that assumed a hostile environment because, for many women, that was the truth. When the attorney challenged her on data retention, Nia leaned forward and said, "We don't hold more than we need, because in the wrong hands, data becomes a weapon." Lena's gaze sharpened. "And what about the optics?" she asked. "Your company is built from your personal history. If your ex-husband or anyone tries to drag your divorce into this, do you understand how that could undermine trust?" There it was, the question beneath the question. Nia felt the room tighten, waiting to see if she would flinch into defensiveness, if she would become the stereotype Ethan had been selling. She took a breath. "My personal history is not the product," she said calmly. "It's the reason I recognize the problem. But Ledgerly is built on research, on compliance, on security, and on the lived experience of thousands of women who are tired of being told their suffering is private." She paused. If someone wants to attack my credibility, they'll have to do it against our results. Silence. Then the executive at the head of the table, Mark Ochoa, nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging a language he respected, restraint backed by teeth. "We'll proceed to audit," he said. Audit. The word sounded clean. It was not. For 6 weeks, Ledgerly lived under a microscope. Ethical hackers attacked their systems. Lawyers dissected their terms. Compliance consultants interrogated every decision. Each time Nia thought they were finished, another request arrived. More documentation, more proofs, more contingency plans. The team thinned under pressure. Not in loyalty, but in exhaustion. One engineer quit quietly, citing burnout. A vendor raised prices. A potential angel investor withdrew, spooked by the scrutiny. Meanwhile, Ethan's shadow moved at the edge of everything. A rumor surfaced that Ledgerly's tech was copied. Another that the company was a lawsuit waiting to happen. A blogger posted a vague thread about founders who monetize trauma. Nia didn't respond. She couldn't afford distraction. She poured her anger into preparation, her fear into precision. One night, near the end of the audit, Lena called Nia directly. "I've read the incident scenarios," Lena said. "I can see you've done the work, but I need to know one thing." "What?" "If this partnership makes you famous," Lena asked, "what will you do with the attention?" Nia stared at the wall of her office, at the sticky notes and threat maps and user stories pinned like prayers. She thought of the season of humiliation, the way people had turned away, the way Ethan had smiled like a winner. She thought of Clara's flash drive sitting in her safe, evidence waiting for the right moment. "I won't use it to punish him," Nia said slowly. "I'll use it to protect them." Lena exhaled. "Good," she said, "because that's the only kind of revenge that lasts." The final decision came on a Monday morning, delivered without ceremony. Cascadia's attorney sent an email with a single sentence. "Ledgerly has passed audit. We are prepared to execute the partnership agreement." Nia read. Then she stood up so quickly her chair scraped hard against the floor, the sound sharp in the quiet office. The team looked up. Nia held the laptop screen toward them like a flag. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, as if joy had become unfamiliar. Then the room erupted. Not polished celebration, but raw relief. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone else swore. Miriam's mouth curved into the smallest smile, the kind that meant, "You did what I told you. You thought bigger." Nia stepped away from the noise and walked to the window. Seattle stretched below, gray and glittering, rain pressing against glass. The city that had tried to shrink her now looked, just for a moment, like a place she could reshape. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt dangerous. Because now, Ledgerly wasn't a dream in a tiny room. It was a contract, a network, a doorway into systems that had once been used against her. And somewhere out there, Ethan Caldwell still believed he could control the narrative. He was about to learn what happened when a woman stopped surviving quietly and started building in public. The invitation arrived embossed, understated, and impossible to ignore. The Northwest Innovation Gala, black tie, waterfront venue, donors whose names carried weight. It was the kind of room Ethan had always owned effortlessly, the kind Nia had once learned to navigate quietly at his side, smiling at the right moments, shrinking herself into elegance. This time, the invitation bore her name alone. Nia stood in front of the mirror longer than she meant to, not out of vanity, but calibration. She chose a black dress with clean lines and no ornament, hair pulled back, makeup restrained. Nothing that begged for approval. Nothing that asked to be liked. She dressed like someone who expected to be listened to. The ballroom glittered with familiar faces. Investors, founders, journalists, people who had once looked through her or around her. Conversations paused as she entered, just long enough to register surprise. So the rumors were true. She felt it then, the shift. Not applause, something subtler and more powerful. Reassessment. Nia accepted congratulations with a nod, a brief smile. She didn't explain Ledgerly. She didn't tell her story. She let people come to her, curiosity pulling them closer like gravity. That was when the air changed. She sensed him before she saw him, the way you sense a storm by the pressure drop. When she turned, Ethan Caldwell stood across the room, a glass of champagne in hand, suit immaculate, expression carefully neutral. Time did not fracture this time. It aligned. He looked older, not dramatically, just enough. The sharpness had softened at the jaw, the confidence frayed at the edges. He watched her like someone encountering a familiar place that had been renovated beyond recognition. Clara was not with him. Nia felt no surge of anger, no rush of fear, just a quiet awareness. This is the moment people will remember. Ethan approached with the same ease that had once convinced rooms he belonged in them. He stopped a polite distance away, smile practiced, eyes searching her face for cracks. "Nia," he said, "you look incredible." She inclined her head. "Ethan, I've been hearing your name everywhere," he continued, voice warm enough for nearby ears. Leisurely, big impact. "I always knew you had potential." The revisionism was almost elegant. Nia studied him for a second longer than necessary. Around them, conversations thinned, people pretending not to listen while doing exactly that. "You encouraged me to be small," she said quietly. Ethan blinked. "That's not fair." "You discouraged my career," Nia continued, her voice even, unhurried. "You isolated me financially. You managed my access to information and called it protection." She met his eyes. "That wasn't partnership. That was control." His smile tightened. "We both made mistakes. A classic. Diffuse responsibility. Soften the edge." Nia shook her head once. "No, mistakes are accidental. This was deliberate." Ethan glanced around, lowering his voice. "This isn't the place." "This," Nia said, gesturing gently at the room, "is exactly the place." A few feet away, a venture partner Nia recognized had gone very still. A journalist subtly angled her body closer. Ethan's composure faltered, just a fraction. "I've done a lot of reflecting," he said. "Therapy, growth. I regret how things ended." Regret. The word men use when consequences arrive late. "I don't doubt that," Nia replied, "but regret isn't accountability." His tone shifted, softening into something almost intimate. "What we had was real, before it got complicated." Nia felt it then, the final temptation, the invitation to re-enter an old narrative, to argue, to explain, to prove. She declined it. "What we had," she said, "was a system where my silence benefited you. When I stopped being useful, you replaced me." She paused. "I'm grateful you did." Ethan stared at her, unprepared. "Grateful?" "Yes," Nia said, "because if you hadn't, I'd still be negotiating my worth with a man who never saw me as an equal." His face flushed, color rising beneath the practiced calm. "You're being unfair." She smiled then, not sharply, not cruelly, with relief. "I'm being accurate," she said, "and I'm done." She stepped back, signaling the end the way powerful people did, without drama, without permission. As she turned away, Ethan reached out instinctively, then stopped himself, hand hovering uselessly in the air. Behind her, the room exhaled. Nia rejoined a conversation near the bar, seamlessly, as if nothing remarkable had occurred. But she felt it, the ripple moving outward, the recalibration already underway. Eyes followed her now with interest, not pity. Later, alone on the balcony overlooking the dark water, Nia rested her hands on the railing and let the night air cool her skin. She had imagined this encounter 100 times. Angrier, louder, sharper. She had imagined triumph tasting like revenge. Instead, it tasted like release. Ethan Caldwell would tell his version of this night. He always did. But for the first time, it wouldn't matter, because the room had seen something else entirely. Not a woman scorned. A woman finished explaining herself. The first time Ethan Caldwell begged, it wasn't on his knees. It was in his eyes. Nia saw him in Vancouver 3 weeks after the gala, at a cross-border fintech summit held inside a glass convention center that smelled like new carpet and expensive coffee. She had just stepped off a panel, Safety by Design in Financial Products, and a small crowd had formed around her. Young founders, compliance people, a woman from a credit union asking smart questions. Nia answered with the calm focus of someone who had learned not to waste energy on people who came unprepared. Then the air shifted. It wasn't applause. It was tension. The subtle tightening of bodies when someone unpleasant enters the frame. Ethan stood at the edge of the group, hair slightly longer than before, suit still tailored but worn at the seams. He looked like a man who had slept in short bursts and woken up with the same panic already waiting. He tried to smile, but the expression didn't hold. "Nia," he said, voice too bright, "can we talk? Just 5 minutes." A woman beside Nia, one of Ledgerly's partners, stepped instinctively between them. Another person moved closer, protective without asking. Nia lifted a hand, calm. "It's fine," she said softly. "Give us a moment." They walked down a corridor lined with sponsor logos and glossy posters about innovation. The farther they got from the crowd, the smaller Ethan seemed, as if his confidence had been dependent on witnesses. He stopped near an emergency exit, shoulders tight, hands flexing as if they didn't know where to rest. "You did great," he said quickly. "I've been following you. Everyone has. Ledgerly it's impressive." Nia waited. She didn't thank him. She didn't react. Ethan's throat bobbed. "I'm proud of you." There was a time those words would have split her open. She would have soaked them up like water in drought. Proof that she had not been foolish to love him. Proof that she mattered. Now, they sounded like theft. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked. He blinked, almost offended by the directness. Then his face collapsed into something raw. "I need help." The words echoed faintly against the corridor walls. "My company," he swallowed, "it's failing. Investors are pulling out. There's an investigation. I'm going to lose everything." Nia's pulse stayed steady. And I'm out of time," he rushed on. "I need a bridge, a loan, not charity. I'll pay it back. You have resources now, and you understand how this works. You could help me stabilize long enough to survive," Nia finished for him. Ethan nodded eagerly, relief flaring. "Yes, exactly." Nia stared at him for a long beat, letting the silence stretch until the truth had nowhere to hide. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it landed like a door locking. Ethan's face tightened. "Nia, come on." "No," she repeated. His desperation sharpened into anger so fast, it almost made her laugh. "After everything we shared?" "We didn't share," Nia said evenly. "You managed, you extracted, you controlled." His eyes flashed. "That's not what happened." "It is," she replied. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice as if intimacy could manipulate her into softness. "I know I hurt you. I know I was terrible. But we were married. That has to mean something." There it was, the hook, the guilt. The vow turned into a weapon. Nia felt something ancient stir behind her ribs, the old training many women carried. Be kind, be forgiving, be the bigger person even when you're bleeding. She recognized it like a trap spring. "What you're asking for," she said, "is absolution." Ethan froze. "You want me to rescue you so you can tell yourself you're not a villain," Nia continued. "You want to rewrite the ending so you can feel clean again. But I'm not here to clean you." His jaw trembled. "You're being cold." Nia's eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Turn my boundaries into a character flaw," she said. "And don't try to stereotype me into compliance. You're not going to make me the angry woman so you can feel like the victim." Ethan's face went pale. The corridor seemed to narrow around them. "I loved you," he said, voice cracking. "I did." Nia tilted her head. "You loved the idea of me. The version that made you look good. The version that didn't ask questions. The version you could shrink." Ethan's eyes glistened now, whether from real emotion or the fear of consequence, she couldn't tell. "Please," he whispered, Just this once. Nia stepped closer, not to comfort him, but to end it. Here's what's going to happen, she said, voice low, precise. You are going to leave this building. You are going to delete my number. You are not going to contact me again. His mouth opened. If you do, Nia continued, my attorneys will handle it. And if you try to smear Ledgerly, we will respond with facts, not feelings. Do you understand? Ethan stared at her, breathing unevenly, as if he couldn't accept that she was not negotiating. I'm sorry, he said, the words spilling out in a rush. I'm so sorry. Nia held his gaze for one final second. Then she turned and walked back toward the noise of the conference, toward the people waiting for her, toward the life she had built from the ruins he'd assumed would keep her trapped. Behind her, Ethan called her name once, soft, pleading, almost childish. Nia didn't stop. She didn't pause. She didn't even look back. And as the crowd came into view again, Nia felt something settle inside her with unmistakable finality. The woman who would have said yes out of guilt had died the day she opened the penthouse door. The woman walking now belonged to herself, and she was done saving men from the consequences of their own choices. Success arrived quietly, the way real power often did. There was no champagne-soaked announcement the day the final documents were signed, no dramatic phone call that made Nia collapse into tears. Just a calm email from counsel, subject line precise and unromantic, confirming what months of pressure, scrutiny, and refusal to break had produced. Ledgerly was now integrated into a national financial network, scaled, protected, unignorable. Nia closed her laptop and sat still for a long time. Outside her office window, Seattle moved the way it always had. Gray sky, rushing feet, lives intersecting without noticing one another. The city that had once tried to erase her no longer felt hostile. It felt small. She thought of the woman she had been the night she walked barefoot into the rain, heart cracked open, dignity clutched together by instinct alone. That woman had believed the worst thing that could happen was being abandoned. She knew better now. The worst thing would have been staying small. Ledgerly grew faster than projections predicted. Credit unions rolled it out across multiple states. Advocacy groups adapted it for survivors navigating exits. Quiet emails arrived every week from women who never used the word victim, who simply wrote, I can see clearly again. I have my own account. He can't touch this. Nia kept every message in a folder she never opened during the workday. Some victories were too intimate for productivity. The press tried to make her story simple. Betrayed wife becomes powerful founder. Pain turned into profit. She corrected them when she could, ignored them when she couldn't. This isn't revenge, she said once, during an interview she agreed to only because Miriam insisted. Revenge is reactive. This is construction. When asked about Ethan, she paused, not for drama, but because the name felt oddly unfamiliar. He was part of the origin, she said carefully, not the outcome. And that was the truth. The final proof came months later, on an ordinary evening, when Nia sat alone in her apartment, larger now, quieter, chosen with intention. She poured a glass of wine and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, one message. I hope you're well. I'm sorry. I understand if you don't respond. Nia read it once, then she deleted it, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with indifference. She opened a new document instead and typed the header for the next phase. Ledgerly Foundation, Financial Autonomy Grants, Microfunding, Mentorship, Legal Education, a way to shorten the distance between harm and independence, especially for women the system overlooked first. She smiled, not because she had won, but because she was no longer playing his game. Revenge had promised satisfaction. What she found instead was something deeper, steadier, and far more dangerous to anyone who once tried to control her. Freedom. If this story moved you, if you recognize yourself in any part of Nia's journey, stay with us. Like, follow, share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like this don't end when the credits roll. They multiply when they're witnessed. And sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do after being broken is build a life so complete that the people who hurt her disappear from the narrative entirely.